And if somebody could just confirm that you can see my screen.
Yep, we can see your screen.
Great, excellent. Yep. Excellent. Well, yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. So as it was discussed, my name is Sachin Jaitly. I am, first and foremost, I suppose, a Rollins alum, as was mentioned, and a Crummer alum. And I wear that as a badge of honor. And today I'm a general partner of Morgan Creek Digital. It's a VC fund focused on everything Web3, including things like cryptocurrency, things like blockchain. And perhaps just before we get kicked off here, I do want to say, although I'm an investment professional, this is not investment advice. So please, if you do decide to enter any of the cryptocurrency markets, do your own research and conduct your own counsel. Well, with that said, we're going to go through a couple of key areas here around everything Web3. So we're going to talk a little bit about the technology, and I'm not intending to get super deep into the tech, but I want you to have a primer of what this really, how this feels and operates. Afterwards, we will talk about cryptocurrency itself, and talk about things like Bitcoin and why it's important. And then last but not least, we'll talk about the Web3 innovations and applications that are coming to be, right? And things like the Metaverse, these exotic terms that are being thrown around. And so we'll dive into that. And after each one of these sections, we're going to stop and we're going to take some questions, and 2 or 3 questions. So I think there's a lot of information that's out there around this sector of cryptocurrency, blockchain. And there's a lot of questions around it. So I don't want to wait till the very end. We'll pause for a few moments in between these sections, and we'll take a few questions in real time. And I would encourage everybody to chat your questions through the Zoom chat, and we will take them and compile them and try to get them all answered, okay? All right, wonderful. So first off, starting with Web3 technology, and what is Web3? Let's start even there. So there's been iterations on what we call the web, right? The internet. And the precursor to all of these iterations is actually information that was disseminated through print media, right? So before the web was created, how were you able to advertise your business? How were you able to socialize information about your business? It was through print media like magazines, newspapers, yellow pages, Reader's Digest, all of those things that are relics of the past in certain ways were how information was disseminated across the world. Well, Web 1 came around and said, well, there's perhaps a better way to do this through the internet. Why don't we create a website? Why don't we create a browser experience for you to engage websites? And that's what Web 1 was all about. It was about information being shared through the internet. And companies like Netscape, AOL, and even early days of Google were some of the beneficiaries of that Web 1 landscape. And then we started to emerge from just sharing information. But well, now that I got all of these eyeballs on my website from around the world, why don't I enable a way for me to sell goods and services through the web? So e-commerce was born, right, through the tail end of Web 1. And all of that, Web 1 experience created a little over $1 trillion in value, right? And the value that is being estimated here is really companies that have gone public with public market caps. So from that, Web 2 was born and iterated upon. And Web 2 was this idea, and frankly, it was just the idea of networks. But these networks came in different forms: social networks, mobile networks, cloud networks. But really, in my opinion, it was all about networks. It was all about the ability to create communities around the web and have different types of use cases around that. And from that, Facebook was born, Airbnb was born, Uber was born. And these different types of way of conducting businesses were conducted in Web 2.0. And we just taking a second here in Web 2, we take it for granted today that we stream music and we stream movies and we access files from a cloud. But 10 years ago, that was not the case, right? We downloaded music, we downloaded movies, we walked around with USB drives and we transferred files from one computer to another. But the whole world went on this iteration, a cloud-driven, network-driven iteration through Web 2. And the average person on the street doesn't necessarily feel that these iterations are happening, but what they feel as a result is convenience, right? They feel a better web experience through all of this. And so the Web 2.0 created almost $6 trillion in value. And here we are at an inflection point, in my belief and many belief. You'll notice that the slope of this curve is starting to bend at a steeper mark. And that is what Web3 and the value that's to be created through Web3 is going to create. So what Web3 is about is things like AI-driven services, right? So when I say this, a very, very basic form of this is, think of when you enter Amazon.com and you're offered product recommendations. That is a very light way of AI improving your experiences by offering you product recommendations around Amazon based on your clicks, based on your purchase history. It provides you with things. But in the future, what you're going to see is the ability for fraud detection, bad actors. You're going to be able to have risk assessment, right? So if you're trying to take a loan out, you'll be instantaneously assessed through AI on whether or not that loan is appropriate or not. And through very sophisticated tools that will make things much more efficient. The second item here under Web3 is decentralization. And we're going to spend a little bit more time on this in the coming slides, but decentralization is key to everything blockchain and cryptocurrency. So we'll just put a pin in that for now, but we're going to talk about that in a moment. And edge computing. So this is a fancy word for just saying there's going to be data centers that are going to be closer to you. And let me give you an example. So right now, if you're sitting in Winter Park and you want to interact with Amazon or Amazon Web Services, you may have to call upon a data center, excuse me, based in San Francisco. That geographical proximity from Winter Park to San Francisco takes time, right? Even though information can work at lightning speed, even light speed, there's still a delay in time that you have to transfer information from one center to another. What edge computing is really about is there's going to be data centers spread across the world that are closer in proximity. Perhaps Amazon is going to, and I'm totally hypothetically making this up, but Amazon Web Services may have something in Atlanta or Jacksonville at a closer location to you that will replicate the information from San Francisco, but it'll be closer. So that's what edge computing is about. And what we believe Web3 is going to create is over $10 trillion in value, right? And that is the combination of more than the combination of Web 1 and Web 2 in terms of value creation. And just as a side here, when you think about kind of this landscape of Web 3, and you think about some industries that have been disrupted in the past, one, you can think of CBS, ABC, NBC, they all lost their market cap to Netflix during Web 2. Right? Retailers in Web 1 lost their market cap, like Macy's.com and others, lost their market cap to Amazon during Web 1 and entering Web 2. What we're seeing through Web 3 is the industry that's going to get the most impacted initially are financial services. We believe that banks, financial services firms are going to lose market cap or at least be disrupted in certain ways that these quote unquote startups in the Web3 are going to gain market share and market cap in. So that is our expectation here. So as I said, we're going to talk a little bit on decentralization. What does this mean? How does this kind of fit into this technology? So what we have here is Harded et al. Wrote a paper called Understanding Cryptocurrencies, which was very fitting for today. And what we have here are 3 scenarios that he highlighted and they highlighted in their paper. So let's take this example in a real forum, and let's use a bank as an example. Let's call it A represents a US-based bank that validates all the transactions, is trusted with your money, and has one general ledger, right? And that is where A represents, a US-based company that handles all the information in one centralized authority. B, consider it to be an international bank, right? A bank that has headquarters in New York, London, Singapore, and they validate those transactions for those regions and combine together, create one global ledger between them all. C is a very abstract thing. And I fully recognize that, as we are, if this is the first time you're hearing of decentralization or thinking about it or seeing it, this is what this will represent is you will not have a central authority like a bank validating these transactions. What you will have is a community of people that will be validating transactions. And let's dive in a little bit deeper into that. So in an example, let's just say I give Michael $1, right? In today's process, you would go to a bank and that bank would say that there are funds in Sachin's account that will represent the $1, and Michael will receive the $1. And there will be no double spending of this $1, meaning that Sachin cannot give Michael the same $1 that he gave Loveland $1. And so there will be a central bank would validate that transaction, and we trust them to do so. In a decentralized world, in a blockchain process, what's going to happen is when Sachin gives Michael $1, everybody on this call will take out a notepad and will verify that transaction is true. They will verify that Sachin had the $1 and Michael will receive the $1. And some people may put incorrectly that Sachin gave Michael $2. Some people may incorrectly say that Sachin gave Michael $0. What we're going to do at the end of that process is we will do a consensus. And this is all done in an algorithm, but just to kind of break it down, we will have a consensus done amongst all of us to validate what Sachin gave Michael. And that will be posted into a general ledger. Right? And that is how this idea of blocks and chains come to be. Now let's kind of take a look at that, the words in this blockchain term. Every time a transaction is validated, a new block is created. And as you can imagine, there's going to be not only hundreds of blocks, but thousands of blocks, but millions of blocks with every transaction that is validated. In between each one of those blocks, there will be a chain connecting those transactions or blocks. And what this represents in this world of blockchain is that there will be a sequence of events that you cannot change. You cannot change the order of these blocks. They will be sequentially ordered, and the information within each block is what is called immutable. And immutable is just a fancy word to say that you cannot change the information. So you will have these blocks that represent the transactions. You will have these chains in between the blocks that represents the order of the transactions. And this is how this term comes to be, blockchain. So with that, let me share a quote with you that Hardell also mentioned. So the rise of cryptocurrencies poses an existential threat to many traditional functions in finance. Cryptocurrencies embrace a peer-to-peer mechanism and effectively eliminate the middleman, which could be a financial institution. For example, no bank account or credit card is needed to transact in the world of cryptocurrencies. And so this is a powerful idea that is starting to see both momentum and adoption in the world, that we can interact with one another without the need of these traditional financial institutions like credit card networks or like banks. And to be clear, I am not suggesting that those financial institutions are going away. What I am suggesting is that there will be new processes and new practices that will be coexisting with the traditional financial world. So what we'll do now is we will take a couple of questions and take a pause as we've kind of completed that technology side of this.
Great, and I guess, Sachin, for the audience too, if you have a question, just go ahead and put it in the chat. I know we did get one question, Sachin, as we were kind of moving along, so maybe I'll throw that out now, but somebody was asking if there's examples of some of the disruption in the financial services space already, or what some of those examples might be.
Sure. No, it's a great question. Let's talk about that, because most of these things that are occurring right now are occurring that they are invisible to the end user, right? In terms of this technology, you know, we talk a lot about Bitcoin and we talk a lot about cryptocurrency. That takes all the oxygen out of the room. But the reality is behind the scenes, there are companies that are adopting the technology that you or the average person is not aware of. And let's unpack that. So I will give you a few examples. So number one, I've invested, in full disclosure, I've invested in this company. The company is called Figure Technologies. Figure is enabling mortgages on blockchain, right? So what is the challenge with mortgages today? If you want to take a residential loan, you go to a lender, you spend a couple months going back and forth with that lender. And at the end of the process, you may receive your capital in another 30 days. It's a bit of an antiquated process. I think we've all gone through. It's a mountain of paper, a lot of human intervention. It's definitely annoying and a little bit more expensive than you want it to be. So Figure came along a few years ago, said there's a better way to do this. We're going to get people approved in 5 minutes, and we're going to issue capital in 5 days. So their big tagline is 5 minutes, 5 days. Well, how do they do this? They effectively have an AI layer that approves or denies you, right, within 5 minutes. And if you're familiar with anything with AI, that's actually a generous amount of time for them to process the approval. If you are approved, it connects over to its blockchain platform where the loan is originated from. And if you can imagine this for a moment, your loan is, that information is all born on chain, right? So it comes in, it's originated digitally. The terms of your loan are put into, it is what's called a smart contract, but that's a fancy word for saying a digitized contract. Okay, and then the title of your home is put on a non-fungible token, which we haven't gotten to yet. We're going to get in later in the presentation, but your title is issued on an NFT. Okay, and so it makes for an incredibly efficient process to originate your loan and get it out to you. The end user has no idea any of this is going on. As far as they know, and frankly, they shouldn't even care. All they care about is that I got my loan faster and less expensive than most traditional lenders would offer me. So that's one example. Another example is JP Morgan has launched Onyx. This is a back-end settlement solution that is rolling out. It's not across the entire company yet, but JP Morgan has started to roll this out. What they have adopted is a way to transfer money around the world, leveraging blockchain in a much faster and less expensive manner. Now, I'm going to say something that's tongue-in-cheek, and it's this, that if I wanted to transfer money between New York and London today, I could put money in a suitcase and fly to London, and it would arrive there faster than if I used the traditional rails of Swift and other means. If I use the traditional rails, it normally takes me 3 to 5 days, and it's an expensive process for me to transfer money internationally, right, New York to London. I fully recognize flying to London is not the best use of my time either to transfer money, but I think the point that I'm trying to make is noted. So what JP Morgan is enabling is a faster settlement solution of money. And so they have launched this. And then last but not least, we would be remiss if we didn't mention Facebook. So Facebook has rebranded its entire company to Meta. What Meta will be is effectively Metaverse, and the underpinnings of the entire company will be built on blockchain. Right? It will be enabling cryptocurrencies, which is one application of blockchain, to disseminate value across the entire network, and for you to interact with one another through this technology of blockchain and cryptocurrency, et cetera. So those are just a few examples, both from Figure Technologies as a startup all the way to incumbent leaders like JP Morgan and Facebook. Yeah, I'll take a pause and see if there's another question. Otherwise, we can move on. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we'll, I see a couple in there, but maybe we'll do one more, Sachin. There was a question from our guests around, is there concern about the amount of energy required for the creation of all these block transactions? If there's, I guess, a concern around the computer resources and so forth needed.
It's a great question. And so we can't look at this energy conversation in a vacuum. And the first thing I think I want to just highlight is, if you consider the financial services industry and all of the energy that it consumes and all the waste that it consumes, both in all the buildings and all the paper and all the energy and all of the inefficiencies that go along with today's financial services, you must compare it against things like the energy consumption that revolves around things like cryptocurrency. With that all said, there are efforts being made to increase the efficiency around cryptocurrency. I won't go too much in depth on this, but I'll just highlight it for the parties that are interested. This energy idea really revolves around a methodology that is called proof of work. And I'm going to resist going into too much depth on it because that could be a whole 10, 15-minute conversation on what proof of work is. But just let it be known that that is where this kind of energy conversation is being had. There's an alternative methodology that is called proof of stake. And proof of stake doesn't have necessarily all the baggage with energy consumption. And so what we're seeing is, in terms of most of the cryptocurrency, not all the cryptocurrency, most of the cryptocurrencies are stampeding toward a methodology of proof of stake. And proof of stake requires a fraction of the amount of energy that needs to be consumed. So, just summarizing, point one is there is an energy consumption that is out there that needs to be kind of addressed and looked at and analyzed. In comparison to the financial services industry, I believe it pales in comparison. And number two, there are efforts being made to reduce the energy consumption and make things more efficient as well through proof of stake. So, and Michael, are there any other questions, or shall I continue?
Yeah, we're starting to get quite a few questions. I would say, let's continue. And then just a note for the audience, what we'll do also is we'll gather these questions, and if we're unable to answer them kind of live right now, we'll get answers for you. And when we send out a follow-up email, we'll have answers to those questions. So feel free to keep asking them. There's some very interesting things in there. But if that works, Sachin, I guess we can kind of move on and we'll gather those.
Sounds good. So moving into our next topic, which is cryptocurrency, right? So once again, cryptocurrency is one of many applications that come from this idea of blockchain, right? This technology of blockchain. And you can't talk about cryptocurrency without talking about Bitcoin, right? Which is one of thousands of different cryptocurrencies. So let's talk about the origin story here, because frankly, to me, it's fascinating. The origin story is in 2008, a person by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto invented Bitcoin and frankly invented cryptocurrency as we know it today. And just to be clear, cryptocurrency has been worked on, researched on, developed on over 20, 30 years. But in 2008, through this white paper that Satoshi Nakamoto created and launched, it was really the birth of cryptocurrency as we know it today. Well, there's a couple things that are extraordinarily fascinating about this, but through this white paper, and I would encourage everybody to pick this up. It's less than 5 pages, I believe, and a wonderful read around what Satoshi Nakamoto invented. Satoshi created something, in my opinion, that will change financial services and change technology generally for all of time, right? You can't put a genie back in the bottle. This is out there. This new methodology, these new approaches. And I wouldn't necessarily go as far to say that this was a revolution of any sort. This was a natural evolution of digitizing things, right? As we discussed earlier, we digitized broadcast media. We digitized the buying and selling of goods and services through e-commerce, right? We digitized all different types of things. This is just a natural extension of digitizing currency and money, which makes much sense for many good reasons. So Satoshi launched this in 2008. And if you recall, in 2008, there was a lot of distrust in both central banks and in government because the housing market collapsed. And so Satoshi and there's no surprise that it was born in the same time, that they wanted to create an alternative system, alternative payment mechanism, or currency that would live next to our existing financial services industry. Now here's the kicker in all of this. Satoshi Nakamoto was a founder of Bitcoin. He created this new technology as we know it today. He became a multi-billionaire through the process and forever changed technology. And yet nobody has ever spoken or heard from Satoshi Nakamoto. Satoshi Nakamoto is the only communication that we've ever had with this individual is through blogs in 2008, 2009, and a couple of emails. This person is a myth. We don't know if it's a he, a she, a they, if it's a community of people that created it. Nobody knows. Now, I have my own suspicions that it will tell over a drink in a private room, but nobody knows who Satoshi Nakamoto is. And there are movies being made about this character. There are books being written. I myself am considering doing a documentary on Satoshi Nakamoto because I think the origin story is so fascinating. But it's a mythical person, uncorruptible, has none of the flaws of the rest of us like a human would normally have. And he's gone on to be more than life. So you can't tell the story without sharing a little bit about Satoshi. And I wanted to make sure everyone was aware. So Hardell, going back to kind of this cryptocurrency topic, Hardell describes cryptocurrency refers to a type of digital asset that uses distributed ledger or blockchain technology to enable a secure transaction. So let's talk a little bit about this. So there are several different types of cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin not only fits into one category, but Bitcoin is one of thousands of different types of cryptocurrencies that are out there. And here are several that we have transactional. And by the way, I'm going to use the word token. I'll use the word coin. Think of those terms as synonymous with cryptocurrency. But we have transactional tokens. We have non-fungible tokens, i.e. NFTs. We have stable coins. We have security tokens, fungible tokens, utility tokens, governance coins, all these different types and use cases around cryptocurrency. What I'll do is I'm going to just talk about the top three in blue in interest of time. So a transactional token. The transactional token is something like Bitcoin. Now, why did Bitcoin become popular? Why was it so interesting? Well, if you want to send value anywhere around the world, if I want to send value today between New York and New Zealand, I can send it instantaneously. I can add value on a Bitcoin, send it to New Zealand, and it would have almost 0 time settlement with almost little expense to me to transfer those funds. It's an incredibly efficient process. And if I want to devise the Bitcoin, it offers me, the technology of Bitcoin offers me to slice one Bitcoin in 100 million units. So if I want to fractionalize it, and these ideas have so many wonderful implications in the world to offering transactions. Now, I will just I will put an asterisk on Bitcoin. I do not believe it's going to be used to buy coffee today. I do not believe you should be using it to buy your lunch or your daily spend today. What I do believe you should do is treat it like digital gold or treat it like a stock, an investment where you would invest in something and it would appreciate over time. And the reason behind what I just said is because things like Bitcoin are under what we call price discovery. The volatility that you feel in Bitcoin and the crypto markets is because people are trying to figure out what's the value of this asset class, what's the value of Bitcoin. And right now it's hovering around 1 trillion. In my personal belief, I believe it's going to be closer to 10 trillion. And in that path between 1 trillion and 10 trillion, it will have a volatile process to get up to that steady state around 10 trillion. So that's the volatility that we feel around Bitcoin. So if you buy coffee today, that coffee tomorrow or in 6 months from now may be valued at a different price. You may spend $2 on a coffee today and maybe $20 in 6 months from now for that same cup that you paid. So that's why I don't believe it's going to be used for the daily transactions today. And by the way, what I just said is a controversial thing with a healthy amount of debate. But that's my take on it. So non-fungible token. As I stated earlier, a non-fungible token is something that authenticates the originality of something. All right, so I'm going to take a really crude example. Let's say I have the Mona Lisa in my possession, right? This is one of the most valuable pieces of art in the world. And I'm looking to sell it to you. Well, you may want to validate that this is the real Mona Lisa. So you're going to bring in a forensic art specialist to come in and validate that this piece of art is real and true, and I'm not selling you a fraud, and you're paying the best money for the best piece of art. Well, in the world of non-fungible tokens, what happens is you don't need a third-party auditor to come in and validate the authenticity of something, the originality of something. The technology will do it for you. There will only ever be one NFT for that one thing it represents, right? That one digital art or that one piece of music or whatever it is. And so NFTs are a wonderful, efficient way to identify property rights, specifically intellectual property rights. Today, it kind of gets caught up in this noise of digital art and people spending absurd amounts of money on one piece of art versus another. And I don't know what piece of art is valuable or not. And I'm not an art specialist. I don't even know how to value the Mona Lisa, right? But what I do know is that this technology will be leveraged in unique ways to identify property rights in the future. And that will be for art. That will be things for music. That will be for a whole host of things that we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail in a third section of this presentation. But NFTs, this conversation about digital art or music is just noise. The way you want to think about an NFT is that it represents property rights. And that's what's very key here and very important around NFTs. Okay. The third one are stable coins. So what's a stable coin is something that is pegged to the US dollar or pegged to the euro or pegged to the yen, but is pegged to a fiat currency. And this is key because now you don't have to, if you want to participate in cryptocurrency, you don't have to worry about the volatility around that price. Right? It's pegged to the US dollar. You know, if I own one stable coin that is represented, that is pegged to the US dollar, it will be $1 for all of time. And this offers an enormous different whole set of use cases around going back to the example of buying your coffee or doing other things. You would probably want to use stable coins for that. And that would make it a very efficient process for you to use something in a digital format, but it will be pegged to your US dollar and you don't have to worry about any of that vol, right? So those are 3 of 7 different types of cryptocurrencies, and we could probably spend a whole hour on each one of these, but in interest of time, we'll just talk briefly about those 3. So the next thing I want to share with you, as we were talking about kind of the crypto markets and the volatility around the crypto markets, something I want to share that is called the Bitcoin halving cycle. So as I mentioned, Bitcoin operates with about an 80% volatility year in, year out. And sometimes it's greater, sometimes it's less, but on average about 80%. And on the x-axis here, if this is too small to read, I'll just state it for you. On the x-axis, you have year. On the y-axis, you have value in US dollar of Bitcoin. Right. What you will see, and the z-axis, don't worry about it. It's stock to flow, but it's for another day. What you will see here on the x-axis is every 4 years, there's a peak and there's a trough that follows that peak. And each of those peaks are greater than the last peak. Each of those troughs are greater than the last trough. Well, this is quite interesting. And why is that? Right? When we all this noise and media attention around the volatility and I think the sky is falling, the reality is that things are moving up and to the right over time. And the reason why this occurs every 4 years, why there's a peak and a trough every 4 years, is due to what's called the halving cycle. So previously, when we were talking about Sachin giving Michael $1 and all of us validating that transaction to be true, the reason why we would take time out of our day to validate that transaction is because we are rewarded, we are compensated with a little piece of that Bitcoin transaction. And we receive compensation. Every 4 years or so, those compensations to all of those parties that are validating transactions are cut in half, i.e. the halving cycle. So if I want to maintain my same revenue, as a validator in this community, as somebody who's validating transactions, I need to sell the same Bitcoin for twice as much to maintain my same revenue, right? I'll say that again, right? My rewards are cut in half. And if I want to maintain every 4 years, if I want to maintain the same revenue, I have to sell the same units of Bitcoin for twice as much just to maintain the same revenue. And this occurs every 4 years, right? So that's why you see these peaks and troughs, and this will continue for the next 120 years, right? Well beyond myself. And this process will continue. And something I want to highlight here, this is not a crystal ball, this is not a prediction, but just following this to its natural cycle, by 2030, by the end of this chart, what is being suggested and predicted is that the value of Bitcoin might reach $1 million per or thereabouts per token, per coin. Who knows if that's going to be true? And I want to be super clear. This is based on some empirical evidence, and there's many models that suggest otherwise. But this is one model that I think is worth highlighting, noting that is often cited in our sector. Right? That the expectation around Bitcoin is that we are in the very early stages of the crypto markets, and the value of these crypto markets, as I mentioned, will rise to about 10 trillion in value over the next several years. So with that provocative, if not slide, let's see if there's any questions that may have come out.
We do have one that came into the chat, Sachin. It's asking, how do you see the hedge fund short plays impacting the future of the currency?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And so just for the context here, as many markets have done over time, there was a lot of hedge funds that started to be created and focused on our sector. So we'll call them crypto hedge funds that entered in. Those crypto hedge funds, some of which took enormous risk, in my opinion. And that risk was in the form of leverage. So they would take their cryptocurrency, they would lever it, and they would buy more cryptocurrency. And what often is the case when you over leverage and with the expectation that everything will always move up and to the right, you're going to get a margin call, and that margin call is going to crush you when things go south. So what we're dealing with right now is several hedge funds, a couple very notable hedge funds in our sector that were perhaps over leveraged. Margin calls have been requested, and they are now in default. So my expectations in the near term is that that's going to have a ripple effect through the crypto markets. And we have not seen the bottom of this cycle, of this trough in terms of prices. And once again, I do not have a crystal ball. I'm just giving you my thoughts on it, but I do expect the crypto markets to compress further. And if I even have to be more specific, I'd say something in the magnitude of about 25% or thereabouts. It will compress further. And then it will be plateauing for some time until a recovery is had. But those crypto hedge funds, many of them got into real risky positions, and they are in challenging moments right now that are going to have reverberations across the crypto market. And it was, point blank with the simple rule of thumb is, don't get ahead of your skis and leverage. And which is, it's not just with crypto funds, it's also with many other hedge funds in every cycle, downturn cycle. It's the nature of their beast for them to calculate risk and for them to take some risky bets. And unfortunately for some of those, they're in a challenging period right now. So hopefully that gives you my color on it.
And Sachin, maybe one other question. We had a good question from Clara, and she was asking around the idea of seeing China ban crypto outright, and some of the other countries around the world looking at banning things and some restrictions. And I guess the overall question was, what does that look like for the adoption rate of cryptocurrency globally?
It's a great question, and I'm gonna kind of restate the question in the form of regulation, and I think that's what we're really getting at here. So let me just speak to that for a moment. So first, what I'll say is all of the governments of the West, the Americas, Europe, I have not heard anybody suggest that they want to ban cryptocurrency or ban blockchain. There are governments in the East that have expressed hostility toward cryptocurrency and blockchain, namely in the form of China. I would even go as far as to say there's, coming out of India and Russia, even there's been some attempts, or if not, public communication that has been kind of hostile toward crypto. The way I kind of summarize in general terms is that one of the core tenets around cryptocurrency is transparency, decentralization, the ability to give authority and power to the people. Central governments around the world, and particularly governments that have more central authority than others, may feel threatened by that. So I think that's why you're seeing what you're seeing in certain parts of the world. So that's the first thing I'll say. The second thing is that as China kind of cracked down on Bitcoin mining, what we're seeing is the VPN business in China is doing very well right now, meaning that people are finding virtual ways to access different IP addresses around the world, still from China. But that's probably outside of the rules of China, or what they would intend. But what we're seeing here in the West is an opportunity now, right? Texas has, because of their, because of the climate, the resources that Texas has around energy, for example, they've started to set up many shops around mining, around Bitcoin mining, around cryptocurrency, general mining and staking. So we're starting to see a huge rise in America, specifically in Texas, around the ideas of bringing some of those centers here. We're also starting to see that all across, I'd say, the Western government. Now, I'm going to draw in a little bit clearer into some jurisdictions. So there's three of which I'll call out. Start off with New York. New York has created some crypto laws, and arguably the most rigorous crypto laws in the world around these items. And it comes in the form of the Bitcoin license, the Bit license, as well as the New York Limited Purpose Trust. These act like money transmitter licenses for the crypto world. And if you're familiar with what a money transmitter license is, it's a transfer of value between point A and point B, but during that transfer, if you were transferring it, you were liable for any of the mishandling between point A and B. These licenses in New York resemble money transmitter license in that same regard. If you're in a crypto exchange, if you're transmitting crypto, you are liable for any of that mishandling. The state of Wyoming has also started to weigh in. And they've said, well, if you deposit cryptocurrency into a platform, who actually owns it? Do you own it? Does that company own it? And they've drawn clarity around that. And Florida, in particular, through Miami and other areas, have started to embrace cryptocurrency being paid in tax revenue or being paid in fees and tickets. And so the municipality of Miami has started to not only accept cryptocurrency in their own treasury, but also they've given the option to pay out employees. Now, a lot of this is more symbolic than anything, but you see where the trend is going here. So hopefully I give you some color, and I want to be respectful of time because I know we just have a few more minutes left, but why don't we keep moving to the next section here. So Web3 innovations and applications. So the first thing I want to touch upon is the metaverse, all right? This is a very exotic thing that is being thrown out there. But in my opinion, it's not that exotic at all. And let me just unpack it for you. Let me just simplify it. In the early 2000s, there was a stampede for every company to light up a website, right? As we discussed earlier, to share information, to conduct e-commerce. And every company did that. Around 2010, there was a stampede for every company to create a mobile app. And this was just a natural brand extension, a natural brand experience that people were building out because there were new form factors. The metaverse is nothing more than what that transition is, or that evolution is, which is building out new brand experiences, building out new brand extensions in this virtual 3D world. And that's how you should think about it, is right? So it's a way in which you can interact in a virtual setting, and you can have a headset, you can have, the Oculus, but you can access it through your phone, you can access it through your computer, you can access it through your tablet. Any of these form factors can access the metaverse, and all this will be new brand experiences. So this is an example of a mock-up for Nike and a city that will be able to, that Nike will be building out for you to go and interact and have cool different experiences. Now, what you're going to see with the overlap of blockchain and cryptocurrencies is that you're going to be able to buy assets, right? Digital asset, but nonetheless, you'll be able to buy assets in these forms, within this form factor, and you can port those assets into different ecosystems, right? Through NFTs, as we were discussing earlier. You'll also be seeing, in financial law, know your customer and anti-money laundering. You're going to be seeing different KYC and AML processes built into the metaverse. Right? You're going to also see companies that prop up to create liquidity around these metaverses, and liquidity pools around these metaverses. But simply put, think of the metaverse as a new brand extension. The underpinnings of all of this will be blockchain. You'll be leveraging cryptocurrency, and all of that will be embedded in these new landscapes. Secondly, non-fungible tokens. So we've talked about this a couple of times, and we've talked about it in the context of art. We talked about it in the context of music. But really, what we're just scratching the surface with NFTs. As I was describing earlier, this is a way to authenticate the originality of something. Well, what else in life do we need to authenticate the originality of? Well, how about your birth certificate? How about your wedding certificate? How about the title of your home? How about the title of your car? Essentially anything that you need a signature on. All of those documents will be put on an NFT in the future. This is a wonderful technology that will be used for document management in the future. Right? And that's why I say we are completely scratching the surfaces, in some ways getting distracted with digital art and music. There will be absolute adoption around art and music for NFTs, but really the value that I see here is that all document management will be placed on NFT in the future. And I'm already starting to see this. So startups that are executing docs with venture capitalists like myself and my firm are starting to put those executed docs on NFT, right? They're being electronically executed, electronically maintained and held within their own databases, but within NFT form. And you're going to, once again, scratch the surface, all of these documents are going to be available via NFT in the future. And that's the belief that we have. And last but not least, this is a very interesting use case that is very little discussed. So central treasuries, right? US Treasury, other treasuries around the world are starting to consider adding cryptocurrency on top into their treasury. So these nations that I'm mentioning right now have started to add active policies to add Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies into their national treasuries. There's a whole line of other countries that also have started to participate, but they don't have active policies. And I'll give you an example. So the US government today owns Bitcoin. Most people don't know this, but we have billions of dollars in Bitcoin. Us as all citizens of the US country, we have Bitcoin as a part of our treasury. Now, it's not an active policy. It wasn't purchased. This was done through seizure of bad actors and bad activities. But nonetheless, we have them in our treasury. They were to be auctioned, and to this day, we've auctioned some of it, but not all of it. And I believe that most governments around the world will start to stack their own cryptocurrencies in their own treasuries over time for a bit of game theory. So in a defensive move, so other governments don't win out on this asset that could be the future. as well as there's an appreciation in value that's occurring through that price discovery I discussed earlier. So for good reason, and also last but not least, is that it could be an inflationary hedge. Right? As we're in hyperinflation today mode, cryptocurrency can offer a hedge against that inflation. So with all that, I will take a pause. I know we just have a few more minutes left, and I'll see if there's any last questions that we can quickly address, and maybe we'll go through a lightning round if we can.
Thanks, Sachin. Yeah, I'm just looking to see if there are any. And again, for the audience, if you have questions that we didn't get to, we will certainly try to get those answered in an email back to you when we kind of wrap this up. The only one I see in there, Sachin, is around somebody asking about, folks trying to get the next group of 1 billion people or so into Web3, right? Like that's new territory. And I guess the question is around what specific things need to be solved or put in place in order to make Web3 accessible to kind of quote unquote regular users.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful question. And actually, when I invest in startups, I ask the same question. Is this startup going to help bring the next 100 million people into adoption into our sector? And it's such a critical thing. I think there's a couple of things that need to happen. Very quickly said is, number one, we need to have the know your customer anti-money laundering. We need to have very clear processes around KYC, AML to ensure that people aren't interacting with bad actors, number one, right? We need to have standardization around those processes and part of all things blockchain and crypto. Number two is we need further clarity around regulation, right? And I welcome the regulation. I think the West is looking to clarify the law. Once again, I don't believe anybody's looking to ban or put the genie back in a bottle. What they're trying to do is they're trying to ensure that consumers are protected. They're trying to ensure that financial institutions are protected. They're trying to ensure that technology thrives. So, and regulation will come with overstepping, understepping. That's just going to be the ebb and flow of it. But I welcome the clarity around the regulation. There needs to be, all of us need to do our part in terms of VCs need to do their part in backing these wonderful companies. Those startups need to do a wonderful job of educating the market and getting their services out there. And I think all of this together, this combination of efforts will drive the next, billion people into financial inclusivity with cryptocurrency.
It looks like, Sachin, we've made it to the top of the hour, and just wanted to thank you again for volunteering and being willing to do this on what a informational session and so many interesting things to think about. We truly appreciate you doing it.
It's my pleasure. More than happy to have a V2 of this in the future. And if there are questions, feel free to reach out to me directly or Michael and Loveland. And I appreciate the time. This has been fun for me. Hope it was fun for you.
Absolutely. And again, to the folks, and I know some people are having to run, but thank you again for doing this. As a follow-up, anyone who registered for the session, we will send out a recording of the session probably in the next 48 hours. So again, you'll have that, and we will attempt to have gathered all the questions and try to get answers to those questions too. But as Sachin mentioned, if there's anything in particular, always feel free to reach out to us, and we can connect you where that makes sense. Again, for folks maybe interested in a Crummer degree, please, let Rebecca Powell in our office know, or let Loveland or I know, and we're glad to help you there. But thanks again, everyone. Have such a good day out there. We appreciate it. Take care.